So there is this crime scene that is, it's over 4,000 years old. And for the most part, we just completely misunderstand the evidence.
We really do.
Right. And I want you to imagine the scene for a second. A man is violently stripped of his clothing. He's thrown into a dry, echoing hole in the ground somewhere out in the Middle Eastern desert.
Just completely isolated.
Exactly. He's left there in the absolute pitch dark. I mean, he's likely screaming until his voice just gives out. And then he's dragged back up into the blinding light, but not to be rescued. He's dragged up to be sold as human property.
And, here is the chilling detail that recontextualizes that entire horrific event.
Yeah.
God watched the whole thing happen.
Wow.
Every single second of it. I mean, he didn't intervene. He didn't send a lightning bolt. He just watched the trauma unfold.
Which honestly brings up a pretty terrifying thought. What if the pit wasn't the crime? What if the pit was actually a mechanism?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is. Welcome to Cracked Wide Open, where Bible mysteries aren't just explained, they're investigated like cold cases. In each deep dive, we analyze the sermons of Pastor Ivor Myers, reopening the text, following the clues, and uncovering truths that have been hiding in plain sight.
And today, we are opening a case file based on Pastor Myers' sermon titled Rule Over It. It's a profound, paradigm-shifting investigation into the actual nature of human captivity.
Yeah.
And really the architecture of our own destruction.
Right. And before we really get into it, I want to talk directly to you, the listener, for a second. Have you ever felt like entirely powerless?
We've all been there.
Yeah, I am talking about looking at a destructive pattern in your life. Maybe it's a chemical addiction or a toxic relationship cycle.
Or a financial habit.
Exactly. A habit you just cannot seem to break. And you feel that suffocating sensation of having absolutely zero agency. You tell yourself, I swore I wouldn't end up here again, and yet here I am trapped.
It's a terrifying place to be.
It really is. So this deep dive is going to investigate that exact feeling. We are going to look at the illusion of powerlessness and uncover a buried piece of evidence in the book of Genesis that completely redefines what it means to be a captive.
Because believing you are just a passive observer in your own downfall is a deeply paralyzing state of mind. But to understand how a human being actually gets to that point, Pastor Myers doesn't start the investigation where you might intuitively expect.
Right.
He doesn't begin with the man at the bottom of the dry hole.
I noticed that, and I have to admit, when I was reviewing the case file, this first turn really threw me off.
It's unexpected for sure.
Yeah, because if we are looking into the captivity of Joseph, which is what the pit story is about, you would think we open up the dossier on Genesis chapter 37. But we don't. The investigation starts all the way back in Genesis chapter 4, the story of Cain and Abel. So wait, hold on. Why are we starting an investigation about a guy sold into slavery with a prehistoric murder case?
It's a great question. And it's because Cain establishes the foundational psychological profile for the entire human race when it comes to facing a trial.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he is essentially patient zero for the illusion of powerlessness. Genesis 4 is the scene of the very first crime after the fall of Eden.
Right, the first murder.
Exactly. But if we want to understand human bondage, we cannot look at the murder itself. The actual foundational evidence is located in the psychological intervention that happens right before the violence.
The pre-crime conversation.
Exactly.
Let's look closely at the text then. This is Genesis 4, verses 6 and 7. To set the stage a bit, Cain has brought his offering from the ground. God has rejected it while accepting his brother Abel's offering, and Cain is just experiencing a catastrophic emotional collapse.
Total meltdown.
Yeah, the text says he is very wroth and his countenance has fallen. So God steps in, essentially pulling Cain into an interrogation room and asks, Why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted. And if thou dost not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him.
So let's examine that specific phrase. Sin lieth at the door. In the original Hebrew, the word used for sin there is chatat.
Chatat, okay.
And the grammar portrays it as a crouching beast, like a predator waiting just outside the threshold.
Oh, wow. Not just a concept, but like a living threat.
Precisely. God is giving Cain a masterclass in psychological geography. He is identifying the exact location of the threat.
Okay, so he's saying the threat isn't fully internal yet.
Right. God is saying, Cain, the darkness isn't fully inside of you yet. It is crouching at the door of your mind.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. God sees the resentment metastasizing. He sees the physiological markers of rage, the dropped countenance, the clenched jaw. And then he issues this fascinating command. He says, "Thou shalt rule over him," which is more accurately translated as "you must rule over it."
But hold on, if we read this closely, that is not a suggestion.
Not at all.
And it's definitely not some gentle motivational encouragement. Like, God isn't acting like a life coach here saying, hey, buddy, I believe in you. You can beat this anger.
Right. He's not handing out participation trophies.
Exactly. It is a divine declaration of authority. God is telling Cain, as a statement of objective fact, that he already possesses the internal mechanism to stop the beast from entering.
That's exactly it. And what is Cain's internal response to that divine fact?
Well, he fails.
He fundamentally rejects it. He assumes he is completely powerless over his carnal mind's demand for his brother's blood.
Right. He buys into the lie.
He buys into the lie that his rage is an unstoppable force of nature and he's just a leaf caught in the hurricane.
So the actual first sin post-Eden wasn't a physical act of violence. It was a psychological collapse.
Yes.
It was a human being deciding, I cannot stop this. I am a victim of my own biology, a victim of my own anger. He believes he has absolutely no power to rule over it.
And that is exactly why Cain is the necessary precedent for this entire deep dive. God attempts to reason with him to prevent his conscience from being locked in the chains of this resentment. God says, rule over it, and Cain's actions reply, I am powerless. Cain had a choice at the threshold, and he just let the beast in.
He opened the door.
He became internally chained by it long before he ever picked up a weapon.
Yeah.
And so with that specific psychological profile established, the man who couldn't rule his internal environment, we can now examine the parallel case.
The man in the pit.
Yes.
We
move to a man who was thrust into the most extreme external captivity imaginable.
Okay, so we turn the page to Joseph. Genesis chapter 37. To give some historical context for the listener, we're looking at a deeply toxic family dynamic here.
Very toxic.
Yeah. Joseph is the favored son of Jacob, also known as Israel, and he has 10 older half-brothers who just absolutely despise him.
They resent him completely.
Right. So Jacob sends Joseph on an errand to check on these brothers who are grazing the family's massive flocks in a region called Shechem. When Jacob asks him to go, Joseph responds with 3 words that basically set his entire destiny in motion. He says, "Here am I."
Here am I.
Yeah.
You know, if you trace that phrase through the ancient texts, it is never just a casual acknowledgement.
It's not just saying present during roll call.
No, not at all. It is a profound posture of total availability. Abraham said it before the binding of Isaac. Moses said it at the burning bush. Isaiah said it when called to be a prophet.
Wow, so it's a heavy phrase.
Extremely heavy. Joseph is declaring his complete surrender to his father's will. And what makes it so tragic is that he's completely unaware that this simple errand of obedience is about to become a descent into a living nightmare.
Because things go wrong almost immediately. He gets to Shechem, but his brothers aren't there. He is wandering in a field, lost.
Just completely vulnerable.
Yeah, and a random stranger finds him and tells him, oh, your brothers went to Dothan. So Joseph redirects to Dothan, and Dothan is where the trap is waiting. It is eerie when you read it. He is literally being guided step by step toward his own destruction.
And as he approaches Dothan, we get a terrifying glimpse into the depth of the brothers' malice. Verse 18 tells us that they saw him afar off.
Before he even gets close.
Right. Before he even gets close enough to speak, they conspire to assassinate him. They see his silhouette on the horizon, and they say to one another, "Behold, this dreamer cometh."
This dreamer cometh. That is just such a venomous label.
It really is.
They aren't just annoyed by him. They aren't just jealous that he got a fancy coat from their dad.
Yeah.
They are deeply offended by his destiny.
Exactly.
Joseph had previously shared dreams where he was in a position of authority, and they want to literally murder the future those dreams represent.
This is where Pastor Myers slows down the investigation to point out a brilliant structural clue in the text itself. It is all about the grammatical passivity in verse 23.
Passivity.
Yes, listen to how the crime is actually written. They stripped Joseph out of his coat, and they took him and cast him into a pit.
Oh, I see. They cast. Joseph is the protagonist of this story, but in this moment, he isn't doing a single thing.
Nothing.
He is an object. Everything is being done to him.
He is grammatically passive in his own life narrative. And this is exactly the connection Pastor Myers is making to the listener's experience with destructive habits or addictions.
Okay, lay that out for me.
When you are caught in the suffocating grip of a true addiction, it strips you of your identity. It casts you down into isolation. It turns you into a completely passive object in your own life.
Wow.
You feel entirely acted upon. You are no longer the one making choices. The addiction is making the choices, and you are just suffering the consequences.
It is exactly like you aren't even driving your own life anymore. You've been shoved into the trunk of the car.
That's a great way to put it.
It's pitch black, you are feeling every single pothole and bump in the road, but you have zero access to the steering wheel or the brakes. You are completely at the mercy of whatever dark impulse is driving the vehicle.
That analogy perfectly captures the terror of the pit. You are in the trunk. But the text adds one more detail that makes the crime even more disturbing.
What's that?
Look at what the brothers do immediately after throwing their own flesh and blood into this dry cistern. Verse 25 says, "And they sat down to eat bread."
Oh, man, that detail is sociopathic.
Completely.
I mean, Joseph is at the bottom of a dark hole. He is 17 years old. He is likely pleading for his life, crying out to his older brothers, terrified he's going to starve to death in the dark.
Begging them.
Right. And they just dust the dirt off their hands, sit down on the edge of the pit, and casually have a picnic. They are eating a sandwich while listening to him beg.
It is a brilliant, terrifying illustration of the nature of sin and addiction. Sin is utterly unbothered by your suffering.
Unbothered. That's exactly it.
A destructive habit does not lose sleep over the pain it is causing you, your spouse, or your children. It does not feel empathy. It will throw you into financial ruin, destroy your liver, or wreck your marriage, and then it will casually sit down to eat bread while you scream from the bottom of the hole.
Wow. It just lacks all humanity. So while they are eating, they see a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants passing by. Judah, one of the brothers, speaks up and says, "What profit is it if we just let him die? Let's make some money. Let's sell him."
Just cold calculation.
Yeah, and for 20 pieces of silver, they sell their brother. Joseph is hauled out of the pit, shackled, and dragged off to Egypt. And if you're reading this for the first time, it feels like this is the terminal point. His life is over.
It really does.
But Pastor Myers points out, this isn't the end of his bondage. It is actually just the warm-up.
Yes, the descent is far from over. We are now moving into Genesis chapter 39, the slave house.
Okay, so things get worse.
Much worse.
Yeah.
Joseph survives the brutal journey across the desert and is brought down to Egypt, which at this time is the absolute pinnacle of global power. He is placed on an auction block and bought by a man named Potiphar, who's the captain of the guard for Pharaoh.
So he's bought by a high-ranking military official.
Exactly. So Joseph has gone from being a beloved son to a victim in a desert pit to being literal human property in the military elite of a foreign superpower. The external chains have become institutionalized and infinitely heavier.
But this is where the text drops a massive anomaly, like a total disruption of what we expect from a story about slavery and human trafficking.
Yes.
Genesis 39 verse 2 says, "And the Lord was with Joseph."
The Lord was with Joseph. And the text doesn't stop there. It tells us that his master, Potiphar, who is a pagan Egyptian military commander who worships a pantheon of completely different gods, actually sees that the Lord is with Joseph.
Wait, Potiphar recognizes it.
Yes. He observes that whatever Joseph touches prospers. So Potiphar promotes this foreign slave to be the overseer of his entire estate. All his wealth, his agriculture, his servants, he hands the keys to Joseph.
Okay, we need to stop and really analyze this because it breaks all of our modern assumptions about how success and divine favor work.
It really challenges our perspective.
Yeah, because Joseph is still physically a slave. He has no rights. He cannot leave. Yet the presence of God on him is so undeniable, so physically manifest in his competence and demeanor, that an Egyptian general recognizes it. It proves that physical chains do not stop spiritual authority.
That is the crucial insight here. But let's define what we mean by the presence of God or anointing in this context.
Good idea.
Because we aren't talking about a magical aura. We are talking about profound, stabilizing internal peace. A state of spiritual flow and divine purpose that translates into extreme functional competence.
Functional competence. I like that.
And the chains did not stop that flow state.
You
can be in a place of deep, agonizing bondage. You can be stuck in a miserable job, a toxic living situation, or fighting the suffocating daily grip of chemical dependency. But God's presence does not require ideal circumstances, comfort, or physical liberty to be active and visible in your life.
But I have to push back here.
Go ahead.
Because if I am putting myself in Joseph's shoes, this feels like a really raw deal.
Oh, absolutely.
If God is with him so powerfully, right? If God is blessing everything he touches and making the crops grow and the accounts balance, why doesn't God just break the chains?
Right. Why not just set him free?
Exactly. If God has the power to make Joseph the best estate manager in Egypt, Surely he has the power to shatter the shackles, strike Potiphar with lightning, and give Joseph a map back to his father in Canaan. Why leave him his property?
That is the exact question every human being asks when they are suffering. If God is with me, why am I still in this mess?
Yeah.
But if God simply teleports Joseph out of difficulty,
Hmm.
what is the lesson? The lesson would merely be that God operates a divine rescue helicopter for his favorites.
Okay, fair point.
By leaving Joseph in the chains and prospering him through the chains, God is demonstrating something much more profound. He is proving the supremacy of internal freedom over external bondage.
Internal freedom.
Yes, God is showing that human dignity, character, and divine purpose cannot be suffocated by your environment. Joseph is internally free while externally chained.
Wow.
Now, contrast that with Cain. Cain was a free man walking around an open field, but internally, he was a chained prisoner to his own rage.
That is a staggering contrast. I mean, Cain was a prisoner disguised as a free man, and Joseph was a free man disguised as a prisoner.
Exactly.
So Joseph stabilizes. He finds a rhythm. He is the overseer of the house. He is respected. But here is the terrifying thing about success. It replaces the test of survival with the test of comfort.
A completely different kind of threat.
Yeah, just as things level out, a new threat emerges. And ironically, this threat brings us right back to the exact same geographical trap that Cain fell into.
Genesis 39, verse 7. Potiphar's wife casts her eyes on Joseph, and she doesn't use seduction or subtlety.
She just demands it.
Right. She leverages her immense power imbalance over a slave and issues a blunt demand. She says, lie with me.
It is a direct order from his owner's wife. And it is not a one-time test of his morals either. The text is very clear that she spoke to him day by day.
Day by day.
This is a campaign of relentless psychological attrition. Every single day, she is in his workspace. She's offering him an escape. She's offering him a moment of physical comfort, a compromise that might even elevate his status further.
The structural brilliance of the biblical narrative is on full display right here. This moment is the direct, undeniable mirror to Cain's trial.
How so?
Remember what God told Cain? Sin lieth at the door. Now look at Joseph's reality. Sin is literally knocking at his door every single morning. Potiphar's wife is the physical embodiment of the crouching beast at the threshold.
Oh, wow. I see it now. Cain opened the door. He let the beast in because he assumed he had no power to stop it.
Right.
But Joseph's reaction is entirely different. When sin knocks, Joseph refuses to grant it entry. He tells her, "My master has trusted me with everything. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?"
He draws a hard line.
He really does. And when she finally escalates from verbal harassment to physical assault, she corners him in an empty house and grabs him by his garment. Joseph doesn't try to reason with her anymore. He literally abandons his clothing and runs out of the house.
And, the detail of the garment is a fascinating evidence here. This is the second time Joseph is stripped of a coat in this narrative.
Wait, yeah, the coat of many colors.
Exactly.
Oh.
First, his brothers stripped him of his coat of many colors at the pit. That coat represented his identity, his father's favor, and his future. They tried to violently strip his identity. And now, Potiphar's wife takes his daily work garment. She is attempting to strip his integrity.
But she fails completely.
Totally fails.
I mean, she gets the fabric, but she cannot touch his character. So because she's rejected, she weaponizes the garment. She screams, calls the men of the house, and frames him.
She spins the whole story.
Right. She holds up the coat and says, "Look, this Hebrew servant came in to mock me and attack me, and when I screamed, he ran and left his clothes." So Potiphar comes home, hears this devastating lie, is furious, and throws Joseph into the king's prison.
And this is where the human mind usually breaks. Joseph exercises supreme moral fortitude. He does exactly what God told Cain to do, right? He rules over the sin at his door.
Yeah, he passed the test.
He did. And what is his reward for this absolute integrity? A deeper, darker level of captivity.
This is the part of the investigation that just messes with my head. Because doing the right thing got him punished.
It really seems that way.
Think about the intense mental warfare happening in that dungeon. Joseph is sitting in the dark, chained to a wall, and the enemy must be screaming in his ear, "Look where your high morals got you, Joseph."
Was it worth it?
Exactly. You should have just slept with her. If you had just compromised, you'd still be sleeping in a warm bed, eating rich food, and enjoying the perks of the palace. Your God didn't protect you. Integrity is a scam.
It is the ultimate crucible of faith. It is relatively easy to believe in a grand divine plan when you are the overseer of the estate and the crops are growing.
Sure, when things are good.
Right. It is entirely another level of spiritual maturity to maintain your posture when your obedience directly results in your suffering. The trial completely broke Cain. He collapsed inward into self-pity and violence.
But it didn't break Joseph.
It did not break Joseph. And to understand why he didn't shatter, we have to examine the impossible anomaly that repeats itself inside those prison walls.
Okay, Genesis 39, verse 21. Joseph is thrown into the king's prison. And historically, ancient Egyptian prisons, especially those for state enemies, were essentially death camps.
Horrific conditions.
Disease, sensory deprivation, absolute brutality. It is the lowest, most hopeless point in the narrative so far.
Okay.
What does the text say? But the Lord was with Joseph.
There is that phrase again. It is the steady, defiant heartbeat of the entire case file.
It really is. The text continues, and showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison.
Think about what that actually means.
Wait, let's make sure we are reading this correctly. Joseph, an inmate accused of attempted assault on a high-ranking official's wife, becomes the warden of the prison.
That is exactly what happens. Look at the expanding geography of his dominance here.
Geography of dominance.
Yeah. He is thrown into a literal pit to die, and he survives it. He is sold as property into an estate, and he ends up running the estate. He's thrown into a maximum security state prison, and he ends up running the prison.
Is a pattern.
It is. And spoiler alert for the end of the narrative, he will eventually be placed in the nation of Egypt, and he will end up running the entire nation. In every single environment designed to crush him, Joseph rises to dominate the environment.
But how does a prisoner run a prison? It defies all human logic. You cannot be an inmate and the warden simultaneously. What is the actual mechanism at play here?
How does a prisoner run a prison? Well, think deeply about the psychology of a dungeon. Every other man in that facility is panicked.
Naturally.
They are fighting for scraps of food. They're consumed by their own victimhood. They are radiating fear and aggression. Joseph, because he possesses that internal freedom we discussed earlier, is the only calm human being in the room.
Oh. The low anxiety.
Exactly. In any high-stress, high-trauma environment, human beings will naturally, almost instinctively, defer to the person with the lowest anxiety. His spiritual peace, his refusal to be a victim, translated into functional leadership.
The keeper of the prison saw that?
He did. The keeper of the prison looked at the chaos, looked at Joseph's profound calm, and essentially said, "You handle this." That is the mechanism of his authority.
That is a massive realization for anyone listening who feels trapped right now. You can be surrounded by the suffocating environment of your addiction. You can literally be in the prison. The toxic relationship, the craving for the substance, the mountain of debt can be staring you in the face every single morning. But you do not have to succumb to the environment.
You don't have to absorb it.
You do not have to become the environment. You can be a prisoner of circumstance, yet be the overseer of your soul.
Yeah.
Being in a fierce daily battle does not mean you are in a state of defeat. Feeling the craving doesn't mean you have failed. You are just in the prison, but you can still run the block.
Beautifully stated. But the question remains, what is the blueprint? How did Joseph actually achieve this level of dominance?
Right.
Pastor Myers cracks his case wide open by revealing that Joseph's impossible rise within captivity is not just an inspiring piece of ancient history. It is a mathematical, prophetic blueprint of the ultimate rescue mission for humanity.
And this is where the investigation just zooms out, and we see the sheer scale of what is happening. Because when you take the case file of Joseph's life and lay it directly on top of the life of Jesus of Nazareth, the similarities aren't just close. They are identical.
It is mathematically precise.
It really is.
Let's lay the evidence out side by side on the corkboard here. Who is Joseph? He is the beloved son sent by his father to check on his brothers, and his brothers reject him and plot to kill him.
Okay.
Now, who is Jesus? He is the beloved son sent by the Heavenly Father to his brethren, humanity. And as the Gospel of John states, he came unto his own, and his own received him not.
Okay, let's keep going. Joseph is betrayed by his brother Judah and sold for 20 pieces of silver.
Right.
Jesus is betrayed by his disciple Judas, which is the Greek variation of the name Judah, and he is sold for 30 pieces of silver. The betrayal mechanism is identical.
And where does Joseph go after he is betrayed for silver? He is brought to the house of Potiphar, a place of high authority, where he is falsely accused by someone lying about his actions.
And where does Jesus go after Judas betrays him? He is arrested and taken to the high priest's house, Caiaphas, where he is subjected to a midnight trial built entirely on false witnesses lying about his actions. The symmetry is terrifying.
It gets even deeper. Joseph is condemned despite his innocence and sent down into the king's prison. But instead of rotting away in the dark, he becomes the overseer of the prisoners.
Wow.
Now look at Jesus. He is condemned despite his innocence and sentenced to death. He is sent into the ultimate prison house, the grave itself. And what does he do in the dark?
He doesn't stay dead. He becomes the overseer of death. When Jesus was crucified and put in the tomb, to everyone watching, it looked like total, irreversible defeat.
It looked exactly like Joseph being thrown into the bottom of the pit.
Yes. But Jesus went into the grave specifically to take charge of the prisoners.
Exactly. The ancient prophecies explicitly outline this mission. Isaiah 42 says the Messiah will come to bring out the prisoners from the prison and them that sit in darkness out of the prison house.
So he didn't just endure it.
No, Jesus didn't just endure the cross. He invaded the ultimate captivity to set the captives free. He became the warden of the grave.
So the entire time we have been reading about Joseph in Genesis, a story written thousands of years before the Roman Empire even existed, we are actually watching a high-definition trailer for the Gospels.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
Joseph's descent into the pit, the slave house, and the dungeon was a 4,000-year-old dress rehearsal for the Son of God descending into human flesh, suffering, and the grave to break the chains of humanity.
The structural perfection of the text really demands awe. And because Jesus conquered the ultimate prison, because he proved that divine presence shatters the power of captivity, it provides the actual functional mechanism for how you and I can conquer our daily prisons.
Which brings us to the most counterintuitive, brilliant piece of linguistic investigation in Pastor Meyer's sermon.
Yes, the paradox.
This is where we confront the central paradox of the message. We asked at the very beginning, have you ever felt like you have no power over your addiction? Pastor Myers takes that exact phrase, no power, and completely flips the definition on its head.
That's a brilliant move.
He says the problem isn't that you are powerless. The problem is that you don't have no power.
Right, and it sounds like parable grammar at first glance. I don't have no power.
A double negative.
Exactly, but he means it literally and functionally. You lack the power to formulate and execute the word no.
Nah, I get it.
When Potiphar's wife cornered Joseph day after day, Joseph possessed no power. He had the immense divine capacity to look the temptation directly in the eye and say, no.
He had no power. The power of the word no. That is just brilliant wordplay. But it forces a very practical question, right?
Which is?
How do you actually acquire this no power? If someone is listening right now and they are white-knuckling it, their brain is screaming for a drink or for a pill or to text that toxic ex they know will destroy their peace for the next month, how do they suddenly acquire no power?
To find the mechanism, Pastor Myers directs us to look at Jesus in the wilderness. Before Jesus begins his public ministry, before he performs a single miracle, he is led by the Spirit into the Judean desert to fast for 40 days. Fasting is the key mechanism here.
But let's clarify this for the listener, because fasting is often misunderstood. It isn't just a religious diet plan.
No, not at all.
It's not just skipping lunch to prove a point.
Right. Fasting is profoundly spiritual, but it's also deeply physiological. It is the intentional act of weakening the flesh by starving its natural cravings, while simultaneously strengthening the spirit by feeding on the Word of God.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think of it in terms of modern neurobiology and addiction science. When you are addicted to a substance or a behavior, your dopamine baseline is completely hijacked.
Yeah, your brain just wants that hit.
Your flesh is demanding that massive spike in dopamine. Fasting, whether from food, from alcohol, from social media, or from a toxic relationship, is essentially a dopamine detox.
A detox.
You are intentionally starving the compromised receptors. But if you only starve the flesh, you will fail. You must concurrently feed your spirit, replacing the toxic dopamine hit with the profound, sustaining peace of God's presence.
Pastor Myers uses an amazing analogy from the Old Testament to explain this dual process.
Oh, the widow's oil.
Yes, the story of the widow's oil. The prophet Elisha encounters a widow who is in massive debt and about to lose her sons to creditors. He tells her to go to her neighbors and gather as many empty vessels, jars, and pots as she can find.
As many as possible.
Right. So she brings them into her house, starts pouring her one tiny jar of oil, and miraculously, the oil flows and fills every single empty vessel until there are no more jars left. The principle is incredibly clear. To fill the vessels with oil, which throughout biblical literature represents the Holy Spirit, the vessels first had to be completely, totally empty.
And this exposes the fatal flaw in how most of us try to fight our addictions.
Right.
If you just try to stop your bad habit, if you just stop drinking or stop logging onto that destructive website, but you do not actively fill up that newly emptied space with the Spirit of God, you're essentially leaving the door wide open.
You're just empty.
Right. You become what Pastor Myers calls a grumpy faster. You are empty, miserable, highly irritable, and extremely vulnerable to relapse because nature abhors a vacuum.
That changes everything about how we view willpower.
It really does.
The power to rule over the beast at the door doesn't come from me gritting my teeth and trying to be a superhero. It doesn't come from me generating enough internal strength to fight off the craving. It comes from intentionally emptying myself, admitting I cannot do it on my own, so that God's power flows in and does the ruling for me.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The no power is not human willpower. Human willpower is a finite resource. Psychologists call it ego depletion.
Ego depletion.
Yeah, eventually, if you temptation long enough purely on your own strength, your willpower battery drains to zero and you collapse.
You just give in.
Exactly. The no power is the infinite power of the Spirit of God residing inside an empty human vessel. When your flesh cries out for the addiction and you have starved that flesh but fed your spirit, the spirit within you rises up and says no.
Wow.
That is how you fulfill God's command to Cain. Thou shalt rule over it. Not by being a strong vessel, but by being an empty vessel filled with a strong God.
And this reliance on the Spirit, this continuous state of being an emptied vessel filled with God's presence, is exactly how Joseph survived the dungeon and ended up ruling Egypt. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. We are cracking the case wide open.
We really are. So Joseph has been in the king's prison for years, dominating his environment, maintaining his integrity, relying entirely on the Spirit. And then the political landscape shifts.
The dreams.
Yes. Pharaoh has a deeply disturbing dream that none of the greatest minds in Egypt can interpret. The cupbearer remembers Joseph, and Joseph is brought up from the darkness of the dungeon into the blinding light of the palace.
And he interprets it.
He interprets the dream, warning Pharaoh of 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of catastrophic famine, and he provides a brilliant socioeconomic plan to save the nation. Now, look closely at Pharaoh's reaction in Genesis 41. He turns to his advisors, points at this Hebrew ex-convict, and asks, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is?"
There it is, the Spirit of God. That is the oil in the vessel. That is the actual source of the no power. And because of that visible, undeniable Spirit, Joseph's trajectory goes vertical.
Straight to the top.
He is taken from the prison stripes, dressed in fine linen, given Pharaoh's own signet ring, and placed at the right hand of the throne. He is made the ruler over all of Egypt.
Which leads to the ultimate, staggering revelation of this deep dive. Years later, the famine drives Joseph's brothers, the same men who threw him in the pit and ate bread while he cried down to Egypt for food.
They have to come to him.
Eventually, their father Jacob dies, and the brothers are terrified. You think, okay, dad is gone. Joseph is the most powerful man in the world. Now he is finally going to take his revenge.
Right. They expect payback.
They fall down before him, begging for their lives. And Joseph looks at the men who destroyed his youth and delivers a statement that completely shatters our understanding of trauma and divine sovereignty. Genesis chapter 50. He says, "As for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to come to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive."
God meant it for good.
I need to pause on that word. He doesn't say God salvaged it. He doesn't say God made the best of a really tragic situation.
Yes.
He says God meant it.
The profound theology of that single sentence is earth-shattering. The pit was never the destination.
No.
The auction block in the slave house was never the destination. The dark, disease-ridden king's prison was never the destination. They were transit points.
Transit points.
They were the difficult, agonizing, but absolutely necessary road to the palace. If he doesn't go in the pit, he isn't sold to Potiphar. If he isn't sold to Potiphar, he doesn't meet Potiphar's wife.
If she doesn't frame him, he doesn't go to the king's prison. If he doesn't go to the king's prison, he never meets the cupbearer. And if he never meets the cupbearer, he is never called before Pharaoh to save the known world from starvation.
So when God told Cain at the very beginning of human history, rule over it, it wasn't a threat. It was a statement of incredible prophetic promise. God was saying, If you stay aligned with me, if you refuse to let the darkness consume you, I will use even the darkest pit, the most unfair accusation, the heaviest chains to elevate you.
It's a promise.
King closed the door on God and became a victim of his own mind. But Joseph, every single time he was thrown into the dark, he essentially kept maintaining that posture from the very beginning. Here am I.
And that is the ultimate takeaway for the listener today. The middle of a God story is never the final word. So the thing you are going through right now that feels like total abandonment, the chains that feel absolutely permanent, the pit that feels like it will inevitably become your grave, it is actually the transit point to your rescue. The enemy wants you to believe you are powerless. God wants you to know that you are an overseer in training.
Powerlessness is a lie. If you keep the door open to the spirit, you aren't a victim of your circumstances. Your current struggle is just the brutal training ground for the authority you are about to step into.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply personal question to consider. What specific pit are you sitting in right now? Think about the walls of your current circumstances.
Yeah, what is it?
Is it a medical diagnosis? A financial collapse? A chemical addiction? A marriage that feels irreparably broken? Can you stop looking at the dirt walls of that pit and instead look for the ways God is asking you to be the overseer of that very space? Can you empty your vessel, ask for the Spirit, and receive the eternal power to rule over it right where you are?
That is the challenge we leave you with. The text is open, the historical evidence is clear, and the blueprint has been provided. If this message stirred something in you, don't let it end here. What we laid out today wasn't meant to be heard once and forgotten. It was meant to be wrestled with. Because the truth is, most people will hear something like this, nod their head, and move on unchanged. But this isn't that kind of message. And this isn't that kind of deep dive. There's more to this. And what comes next pushes even further into places that challenge comfort, assumptions, and what many have settled for. So don't just listen and disappear. Follow this deep dive so you don't miss what's coming. Until next time. We will see you on the next deep dive of Cracked Wide Open.